Jazz's influence on the world. Well, to start, jazz has come from New Orleans. It was started in New Orleans with the integration of music from the Caribbean, uh, from the southern United States, and also there was in European influence. Jazz in the Caribbean, when it started, it was the purpose was to give a voice to the voiceless. Um, since jazz's inception, has been the driver of integration and mutual respect. This is a comment that comes from the UN, which I had no idea that jazz was so big in the UN. So, jazz has spread internationally for the purpose of ambassadorship. In the early 1920s, jazz went to Japan. Japan dance halls. And in 1933, Japan opened its first jazz cafe in Osaka. Jazz, just as everywhere else, jazz was popularized in Japan, and jazz musicians began traveling to the region. Today, Japan has the biggest jazz community in the world. Now, that should be shocking to everyone. And the fashion goes along with it. Starting in the 1920s, jazz constructed how fashion changed. The wardrobe period began to be designed for parties. Clothes were made to be more loose fitting. That's pants, suits for men, dresses, skirts were flared so that dances such as the Charleston, which were very vigorous, could be performed. And after they were performed, the people would be in, how could you say it? They were still in shape to go out and party. The loose fitted clothes also provided air, so they were airy, so they could get a little breathing room. But aside of the clothes, the hairstyles were affected greatly. Who had loved the long hair began to cut the hair off so that it didn't sway and maybe slap them as they done dance moves. Men and women both began to use additives to slick down their hair. That was women would do this when their hair was not in the bob. So we'll move on from Japan to the Middle East. Jazz musicians were sent to the Middle East as ambassadors. The first one we have is Dizzy Gillespie. Then we also have Louis Armstrong, but Duke Ellington was the most traveled and most charming of all the jazz ambassadors. Our jazz musicians were sent to the Middle East as ambassadors to try and keep the countries in the region from becoming communist, as this was a threat at the time, and America didn't want to have to deal with uh, the Middle Eastern countries as enemies. Now, the ambassadors going there, it helped create a whole new form of jazz, which was Arabic jazz. And Anwar Brahim is one of the most famous of the Arabic jazz artists, and he created by fusing jazz with classical Middle Eastern or Arabic music. Now, going from the Middle East to Romania, or we could just say Eastern Europe, one of the most famous jazz artists there is Mircea Tiberian, who is a jazz pianist. Now, Tiberian, at a young age, at the age of 10, he was introduced to jazz by one of his teachers. And also, aside of that, one of the biggest influence in Eastern Europe was a television show. the American Jazz Program, which was hosted by Willis Conover. The most of Europe and introduced them to a new form of art, which they ran with, honestly. Now, aside of all the countries that jazz has traveled to, aside of the ones that I've mentioned, we have Azerbaijan, the Balkans, Colombia, Denmark, Shanghai, Delhi, and one other place that jazz went, which is going to be shocking to us all, is Nazi concentration camps. There was a jazz band in Nazi concentration camps called the Ghetto Swingers. And obviously, they learned of jazz by ambassadors. And we even have Paris. Hemingway talked of walking into clubs in Paris and hearing jazz playing. Aside of that, it's the UN that has the biggest push for jazz. And on World Day, the UN celebrates jazz's influence to connect people. And that's the biggest influence it has on the world, is that it connects people. Jazz brings people together and of different backgrounds. And unbeknownst to me, or I would believe to most Americans, we just thought that this was a form of music to enjoy, to have fun. But jazz has really changed the world for the better. This African American art form that was used to give us a voice in a time when we were voiceless has traveled the world and impacted country after country after country internationally. And we should all be aware of that.